atmosphere. And we want to welcome back some of our international guests and hosts. And what better way than to conduct a panel with the ADHD associations of a number of different countries to ascertain and to determine the similarities and differences in the way that ADHD is administered and looked at around the world. So I'd like to start to welcome in the following people. ADHD Australia welcomes ADHD UK and ADHD Singapore. And we're going to have an engaging panel discussion discussing things like diagnosis pathways, supply chain challenges for medication across the world, and support in the workplace and education system. I'd like to introduce the following people. Moonlake Lee, who is the founder and director of Unlocking ADHD Limited Singapore. Melissa, you know, a CEO of ADHD Australia, and you've seen plenty of her. And after a good night's sleep, he is back. Henry Shelford, the CEO of ADHD UK. Welcome back, folks.
Thank you. And well done on everything you've done during your day.
It's been a riveting series of presentations, as indeed last night was as well. So things seem to be going very, very well.
And this is a good point to remind everyone that obviously the videos are kept. They will be on YouTube. Everyone can catch up. No one's expected to watch all 24 hours. That's not how this works. We chase the sun going around trying to bring experts from insights from around the world. And that's what we've done. It's lovely to have this collective of ADHD charities here.
Awesome. Now, before I got any questions, Mel or Moonlake, would you like to add anything? Otherwise, please do, and then I'll go into questions.
I'm very excited to be here. Yeah.
It's great. Welcome. Glad to be here. Well, we've talked about some questions beforehand. The first one I wanted to talk about is, again, it's about comparing similarities and differences. I wanted you to describe what the diagnosis pathway is for ADHD in your country. Moonlake, could I start with you?
Sure. Singapore, we basically have a public and a private system. So if it's public, that means that most people would go for a subsidized treatment. So it would have to go to a general practitioner or a polyclinic doctor first for a referral to a specialist, usually a psychiatrist. So going that route makes it more accessible in terms of financially, but there is a longer waiting period. The other route would be the private route, the private clinic, and that is actually quite speedy. It could be within a week or even a few days to see someone, but of course there's going to be other considerations like financial. So I think that might be similar in some countries, but I think the big thing to know about Singapore is that we're actually tremendously under-resourced when it comes to mental health professionals. So I looked at some data, before I came on, and in 2022, it was like 9.7 psychologists and 4.6 psychiatrists per 100,000 public sector. So what the government is doing right now is there's an aim to, by the time 2030 rolls around, to increase the number of psychiatrists by 30% and the number of psychologists by 40%, because the Singapore government recognizes the importance of mental health. And that's what they're doing to try to make sure that the population is well taken care of.
And I think it's good. I think we have some almost replication here in Australia. So in Australia, what we find is there is similar, I'm going to say, system in the sense that we also as well, many individuals can go privately. We also as well have individuals that go through what we have as a Medicare. The wait for that is quite significant. The cost of diagnosis is relatively high for individuals. Many people do not get a diagnosis because of the challenges. And currently, as we sit in Australia today, having a diagnosis for many individuals, it can range. Some individuals can be paying between $3,000 to $10,000 plus for a diagnosis across the board, and the wait time for those individuals is quite significant. So similar patterns. We also as well have very limited amount of psychologists and psychiatrists, particularly in adult space, that also diagnose individuals, not just with ADHD, but across the board. So our shortage is quite prevalent to our us here in Australia. Henry, how about in the UK?
I was trying to work out how to say it without saying a bad word, show, because we have a completely overwhelmed system. The worst place is Sheffield. We have a localised public healthcare system. So the worst case place is Sheffield, where there are 6,000 people waiting for an assessment, and the health system only saw 3 people last year. So we have an effective wait time of 2,000 years. But then we have other parts of the country where the wait time for an adult assessment is just 12 weeks. And with those kind of disparities, but there has been a complete lack of resourcing. I'd be interested to know how the different countries first identify ADHD, because you both talked about an overwhelmed process. Like in the UK, we rely on teachers, and in fact, for the public system, the NHS, in many cases, it has to be a referral from the school, and those people aren't medically trained. We have a wild issue of people not picking up, those teachers not picking up ADHD, particularly girls, particularly inattentive, either boys or girls. We can see that in the numbers. We get good numbers on pharmacy, so on the amount of medication, which is a proxy for assessments, and that shows the ratio at 21% for girls instead of the third it should be. There is a private system like yours, and it can wildly vary. And actually, a lot of people find themselves not realizing how expensive it is, particularly because they're used to the NHS system. So they'll go and get a private diagnosis. They'll see the price for that. And then they discover every month they need to go back. And that bit can really vary. So some providers are like, you're all in. That bit's going to cost about 500 quid the whole year. Other providers are like, right, that's 250 quid per month, plus your prescription, which is you're not going to be NHS. You're going to have to pay the retail price. That's going to be maybe another 140 quid, that sort of amount. And, a lot of people are suddenly looking at that going, oh my gosh. And then you go to your NHS GP and go, look, I've got a diagnosis. It's a medical condition. Like, can I get it on the NHS instead? Like, it's medicine. And the GP goes, no, no, you can't, because I'm not going to. So 50% of GPs will say yes, and 50% will say no in a survey we did. And then that's worse. That's for England. In Scotland, it was 60% saying no. Wales, it was 70% saying no. And you're just like, it's just very unreasonable. You're like, I have a medical condition, a need for medication, and you're just refusing it to me on the state because I had to go private, because the wait list in my area is 8 years. I mean, I just feel like I'm in some kind of ridiculous Greek tragedy style setup. So it's tough. And the other major issue we've got is from child to adult. So we have a child system in the state and then an adult one. And we see people age out of the child one at 18. They're supposed to just get picked up by adult services. Adult services is overwhelmed. And so they're like, yeah, see you in 2 years. And people's medication is stopped. So that child turns 18 and we snatch defeat from the jaws of victory. I've spoken to GPs who say, like, I just see people on my roster, they turn 18, and the next note I go talking to our earlier sessions and your earlier sessions on crime, we see people being failed in education, falling into crime, and as GPs just said, I see the 18, I see the medication stop, and then the next thing I see is a note from the prison service asking for medical records, and it's just awful. Back to you.
Tell me, what is the post-diagnosis situation like in each of your countries?
Shall I start first? Okay. Post-diagnosis. I think it really depends on the professional that is making the diagnosis and whether it's in a public hospital or in a private clinic, because it really varies. And that's the thing that we're trying to do here, to be more consistent, because for many years, a lot of people in the ADHD community were thinking that medication was the only way to manage ADHD. And it is an important strategy, but there's other ways too, whether it's therapy, coaching, lifestyle changes. So not everyone is presented with as comprehensive list of tools as we would like. So what we're trying to do now as an organization is to work alongside the mental health professionals to let them know that we are very much community-based and we're there to support from a peer perspective. So in between appointments, if people need support online, in person and so on, and also trying to come alongside to upskill the knowledge of professionals in the field, whether it's mental health professionals, teachers, even those working in HR departments, so that there's better understanding and support for the condition. So it's really scattered in one word, I guess, if you were to say. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
It's interesting. I mean, like we're similar. Look, what I would say is children, and when a child has a diagnosis, often that's still probably similar to your comment, Henry, earlier. A lot of that is stemmed around the school seeing some challenges and they're wanting to engage. They see that there's some challenges. The child don't necessarily know what it is, but seek family to get some additional supports. What can then happen is when a diagnosis happens, depending on the person that does the diagnosis, around also the family's ability to be able to purchase therapy and the availability of therapists, or the availability of coaches or supports, and or cost ability from a family perspective, or a person as an adult if they're working. So it can vary. But if you're an individual that has received a diagnosis, and you've had a diagnosis, for example, by a psychologist, and you may come away, if you're a person that doesn't necessarily have the financial stability to back you up, that what that could look like is for you may not get the supports. So seeking a therapist, seeking some additional supports could be quite limited. We have a lot of, in Australia, family help groups, volunteer groups and supports that are really trying to step in and really trying to work with other family members and other individuals also with ADHD. And there's a lot of work that's trying to be done. But in terms of paid services and the ability for ADHD in Australia to be recognised in the way that it needs to, there's a huge amount that needs to be done for people, a real lack in education across the board. Henry, I'm going to hand across to you to see how different we are in the UK.
It is actually fascinating listening to the different situations, both the commonality of the sort of awfulness and the different parts. And listening to it, I think, and having talked to other people, in some respects, I think some parts of the UK support are the best in the world, and some parts are the absolute worst in the world. And best in the world, we have an absolutely extraordinary government grant for supporting people with disabilities in the workplace. So people are able to access a grant of up to £66,000 per year to support them. Often we see for people with ADHD, they're getting coaching. So that's one-to-one bespoke support to build up strategies that make a difference. We've seen purchases of equipment where, for example, you've got very time pressured equipment. For example, I was working with a medic, a very, very time pressured piece of equipment, and Access to Work bought another piece for them so that they were able to have more time with it, which was a pretty substantial purchase. Obviously we then managed to mark that up somewhat, and the wait time is 8 months, which means that although it's important to know that if someone starts a new job, then they accelerate that, and you'll expect to be seen within 2 to 4 weeks. So they recognise that first start point is important. Worst within the health system, I mean it's an absolute shambles. So you've got to laugh how awful it is. Right, you go and get a diagnosis. You wait often years. You go and see the person, you get an assessment, and they go, right, you have ADHD. And you go, okay. And they go, would you like to explore medication? You go, you know what, I would. They go, great, see you in 2 years, maybe 3. Unbelievable, right? You're sitting there with the person who can prescribe and can help, and they're like, see, and that's happens frequently, this sort of dual queue. What's happened is one of those quirks of when a system isn't monitored well enough. So the wait times for getting an assessment, people have started to pay attention to. And so a number of the regional areas have gone, right, people are looking at that. They're not looking at this. What we can do is we can release resource. If we do titration, I don't know, on the never, but later. And that then means we can use that same resource for assessments, which is being measured. And so you suddenly saw this dual queue thing happening. And so that's been, I mean, that's, can you imagine, you get this recognition and you suddenly like, right, I know I've got ADHD now, I want to change my life. And one of the most significant tools is withheld from you. And so, yeah, that's why I think some of us, it's groundbreaking. The support in the workplace is like it has so many problems in terms of particularly the wait of 8 months for most people when they're getting a diagnosis. They're not new starter. But for
do you have people across to we have a lot of people that can't get supports in a state and they go to a different state, so they up and take not just themselves but their family in some situations to live in a different state because the supports are just not in one of our states or some states. So we have situations where people have because of the lack of supports kind of, and in some areas it may be, I'm going to say not fantastic but a little bit better. We see situations where people move across state to state, and it'd be interesting if in the UK and Singapore you have that as well.
Well, Singapore is a really small place, so we can't really move around too much. Maybe just to a different area, but it's still the once very small island. Yeah.
And do you have people move out of Singapore though, just actually to get to a different place? Do you find that?
I think there is some people underground trying to arbitrage, in terms of things like medication and all that. Or if people do have family members and they were from a neighboring country, they might go back there. It might be maybe easier access. But the fact that the regular appointments make it a little bit prohibitive, except the person is going back and forth quite regularly for business or for other reasons.
Yeah.
Oh, that's an interesting.
And Henry, how about you?
I just thought it's interesting, the sort of international aspect of Singapore, that people are going to other countries. Yeah, again, I like I don't know if it's a theme, but like best and worst. Again, so in NHS England, they realised we got nicknamed the postcode lottery, which is our sort of zip code, where people in one area, as I talked to earlier, you've got a 12-week wait, and another area you've got a 2,000-year wait, and some legislation was passed to say that you could be seen in any part of the NHS England. So if you are in the 2000, you could be seen elsewhere. Now that meant absolutely nothing prior to the pandemic, because you're not going to do regular appointments, just as Moonlake's talked about, in a completely different area. It's just not feasible. But with the advent of this, the virtual meeting and the associated virtual assessments, it is possible. And so post-pandemic, we suddenly saw this explode in terms of people using that system, and it's called Right to Choose. We have very extensive guidance. And what the other big thing that happened was some subcontractors for the NHS were allowed to, you're allowed to go straight to them. And so essentially you're going to a private company within the state system, and that's we've been monitoring those in terms of wait times. And the shortest wait time you go to is 6 weeks, which is incredibly different from 2,000 years. But worst, we have this devolved nation system. So we've got Wales, we've got Scotland, we've got Northern Ireland. We have some nice guidelines that provide the rules and what you should expect. They don't apply in Scotland, and Scotland doesn't even have guidelines for ADHD. They had some, they got rid of them because they got out of date. But that's a big deal, because you have to provide the service in the guidelines. So we spoke to someone in Wales, they weren't offered, they were told there was no adult ADHD service, and we said, fine, you can actually force the local area to pay for you to go anywhere you want, private to cost, because it's a service that should and has to be provided. And in Scotland, we can't say the same. So we have people, we spoke to someone recently, they said, I went to my GP, I got a referral, I was put on a list, I called the list, and the people running at the hospital running it, and they said, we don't have one of those. We've got no ADHD service. your queue is a fake queue. And it's just made to make you feel happy, and it does nothing. And obviously, they have talking to their MSP, the Member of Parliament for Scotland, and to try and address and say how awful that is. But so in those areas, you can't go out of the postcode lottery. So if you're in Wales and you're told, as someone was, your wait time's going to be 8 years, you're just like, man, sucks to be me. And that kind of disparity needs to change.
Mel, could I ask you a question? How confident are people in declaring their ADHD status in the workplace in Australia?
From what I know and from my personal experience, there's still a lot of organisations where people with ADHD feel very uncomfortable disclosing. I know that individuals themselves, people I've worked alongside, and we did a presentation earlier about individuals feeling that they're nervous. The higher you go into particular roles, leadership roles, executive roles, people feel more nervous about disclosing their ADHD. And also, a lot of organisations don't know what to do when people do disclose. So individuals themselves feel, why would I disclose if nobody's going to be able to make a difference to provide some additional support or, whatever that looks like for a person in terms of differences to help that person to succeed. So we know that people choose often not to disclose, and the outcome of not disclosing for some individuals is really tricky. So that could look like people having to mask at work and struggling from a ongoing perspective of being somebody different in the workspace to your genuine you. In other individuals, we see situations where people struggle, they have challenges, and sometimes there's a worst case scenario, individuals are performance managed because they're not disclosing, and they then get to the stage of being challenged in the workplace. And then in other situations, when people do disclose, it's really difficult because individuals feel as though the people working with them do not understand their needs. And in some cases, people actually have very negative experience of disclosure. I know personally, I have ADHD, and I basically am successful in the workplace as an executive. I have disclosed, and I know that disclosing in my case has helped other people disclose not only ADHD, but disability. So my advice is where leaders can disclose, I think it's better then, because it gives that sense of security for the team. I don't know, Moonlake, if you have a similar experience or what it's like over there in Singapore.
You see me nodding my head, okay? So I definitely resonate with you. Many similarities, and I think there's a little bit more conservatism here because ADHD or the awareness is not as established as, for Australia and the UK. It's not even considered a disability in Singapore at the moment. So, there's lesser frameworks for accommodation. What we normally share with our community who ask this question over and over again is we say, treat it like a date. You're not going to reveal everything the first time because you don't know what the recipient knows about ADHD or thinks about ADHD. Wait until at the right time. But definitely we do encourage people to share. And in fact, yesterday we were celebrating our hangout, and we had our board member, who's a very senior financial industry professional, share with everyone. And he's very open about it. And he says that that's something that is important for him in his position to share too, so that there's more openness and more acceptance. And for Unlocking ADHD in Singapore, for ADHD Awareness Month, we're having this Champion for ADHD campaign, particularly on LinkedIn, because we want people, particularly on LinkedIn, because most of them are working folks, who have ADHD, to feel comfortable to share. Because as you said, Mel, when one person shares, then people don't feel they're so alone, and they feel the courage to also share. So that's what we're trying to do here, to make it a little bit more and conducive to have that openness.
Excellent.
Thank you. I love the analogy of dating. I think it's fantastic. I think I shall use that myself.
There is one question I want to ask, because I'm sure it varies from country to country, but what is the supply chain situation in your country regarding medication? Is it improving, or is it more of the same? Henry, can I start with you?
Yeah, sure. So, and particularly because we have a UK problem on this one. So we had a national patient alert. It was interesting because we had the conference last year, and it was right in the middle of that, talking to you guys. At that time, you said, we don't have a significant problem. And the factory that made that particular medication was in Ireland. It's one factory for the whole world. And what then became clear, because we then talked about a month later, you said, we've now got a massive problem, was essentially because Australia is quite far away and the supply chain meant that was medication on ships getting to you, and it was there and then it wasn't, and you had that lag. We've then had another medication alert around a different medication, and it's a huge problem. In the UK, we just make it so much worse. So not only can you not, your medication's out, but you can't see the specialist because of that 2,000-year queue. You can't see the specialist to get a different prescription. So in the UK, you can only get it from your ADHD specialist. A GP cannot change your medication. So you've got to see that specialist, and you can't. And so instead of being able to go, right, I can't have this one, can I muddle through on one which isn't quite right for me but will help me? And it's not. So our situation is made much worse by the way we do it locally.
Mel.
Yeah, I just reflecting on your comment, Henry, and something that we find here as well and have a lot of feedback from our community is the challenges when a specialist obviously prescribes medication, and the individual then is required to continue to go back to book appointments and to get the prescription from that particular medical professional. The difficulty is getting appointments with the medical professional that's prescribed the medication is quite difficult. And therefore, what happens is the same reason as you. The GP, for example, can't prescribe the medication or to change the medication because the medication basically can only be changed by the prescribing doctor. It creates challenges for people. So we have situations where we've got individuals that contact us, which say that they're running out of medication, they're really struggling, they can't get appointments with their regular individual that they're seeing, their prescribing doctor. They, for example, have difficulties where things from their perspective, might not be impacting in the way that they need to. They need some additional support. So wait lists are huge. So similar challenges that we face. One of the other challenges is actually about the cost as well for the medication. Again, in Australia, for some individuals, the cost of the medication is difficult for families that really struggle to be able to afford not just the diagnosis, but the ongoing cost of medication, whether that be an adult or other. So that cost also can occur additional for people, which people struggle with. And we also have state differences. So slight differences and nuances per state. And I won't go into that because there's a huge amount of differences that I could talk about all day, but subtle changes, and it is quite complicated across Australia.
Look, I'll go with you, and then after your response, because I'm keeping an eye on time, I know that there are people in the UK waiting to come on. After I get your response, I've got 2 more questions, and I'll do rapid fire around the horn, if that's okay.
Okay, mine will be quick because I did a quick research with a medication provider, a public institution, mental health professional, and also in private, just to have a rough idea what it is before I share about this today. And so far, the situation here is being managed. So far, okay, So and we hope it stays that way.
Excellent. So, I think we just lost Mel for a second. So here are my 2 questions. Firstly, what is the big change you would like to see your country make regarding ADHD? And the second thing is, all our organisations are limited in terms of time, funds, personnel, and the like.
Yeah.
If you could wave your magic wand, what is that one thing that you wish you had in terms of resource that would make a difference? I'll go
£1 million.
That's a good answer. There's nothing. My wand isn't working, Henry.
Which reminds me, do go to globaladhd.com and donate, particularly if you happen to have £1 million spare. I think we are all, it is tough. We all struggle for money. Sorry, back to Moonlake. I jumped in.
Well, I think for us, the main thing, if I had to pinpoint one thing, is really to have a better understanding of what ADHD is and its impact. Its impact across the lifespan in multiple settings. because right now there isn't that much understanding of that, which is why among the 5 charities in Singapore that are in the special education needs, which is where we fall in, there are only 2 charities, ourselves and another one, that are not as supported with tax-deductible donations. We're hoping to change that soon, but in terms of funding, significantly low because it's not perceived as big an issue. So we're working hard here to show the connection, with the comorbidities, the prison system, many other aspects, right, that will affect someone with ADHD. So that's what the magic wand is. It's really to understand the social, the economic impact of ADHD.
Thank you. Mel, the 2 questions were, what would you most like to see change in Australia regarding ADHD? And the second thing was, in a world of limited resources, what is the one thing that you would put ahead of all of others that would help ADHD achieve its objectives?
Yeah, look, I think from my perspective, we've just had a fantastic inquiry, as you know, an ADHD inquiry. There's been some amazing recommendations that have been pulled out of that. I would love to see some of them come to reality. So from a diagnostic perspective, research perspective, looking at education, right the way through to the workplace, really being able to enact upon those recommendations to make a significant difference to the lives of those young people and those adults with ADHD, and the people also working alongside them and supporting them as parents and carers, to be able to make that difference. So it's really about, we've got the foundation here in Australia. It's about putting it into actually make it happen, and supporting with that, obviously, from a government perspective.
Excellent. Well, Henry, we said that we would hand off to you at this time. This is what we'll do now. Thank you, Moonlake, for joining us. It was a compelling and fascinating conversation. I appreciate the time. Mel, I'll let you do the formal handover to Henry. People in the Southern Hemisphere can continue to watch, but we might retire and hand the stage back to the maestro.
You are looking fresh as daisies. Like, it's very impressive.
It's facadism. Over to you, Mel. Thank you. Did you want to parting words?
So I just wanted to say, wow, it's been a fantastic experience. I feel really privileged to be able to have great conversations with, obviously, yourself, Moonlake from Singapore, Henry, today, as countries getting together to have a conversation. The experience that we've also had sharing the conference across the 24 hours, outstanding. I don't know how we do it, but we do. And I'm just really, really delighted to hear all of the messages and emails and feedback that we've received so far. Really, really great outcomes. And it's an honour to obviously do this every year, and really, really looking forward to being able to continue to share these stories, because, as you mentioned earlier, Henry, this is obviously as it sits today, live, but many individuals won't be able to see it live. So creating that opportunity for people to look back and look at it at their own time as well.
Yeah, I'm just amazed to find that, we're all different countries, but there's also similarities, fundamental similarities, but also a lot of things to learn from each other. And I think Singapore is just very privileged to be here with Australia and UK. And I think there's a lot of things to learn from your inquiries, and we hope that as time progresses, we'll get more similar, right? We all progress together as a global community. Yeah. So thank you for having us.
No, well, thank you for being part of it. And obviously, what you've done is extremely impressive in Singapore. Essentially, she'll never say this, but she'll always say it's a team effort, but essentially single-handedly created Unlocking ADHD and pushing for change. The Singaporean system is pretty difficult to set up a charity, and she's in that process and doing already set up the charity, now talking about getting the tax deductible status, which is a big deal for unlocking funds. All of us struggle for money. It's part of a stigmatized condition. People don't do the wearing the t-shirts, doing the runs, proudly shouting about their involvement in the same way they do for other conditions. And so we have this sort of double fight that we're trying to change that stigma, but that change is made more difficult through lack of funds. One of the things we're trying to do with the conference, and successfully doing, is build a coalition of ADHD charities around the world, so we can take the best of each other, learn from each other, and advocate for change with the benefit of that learning. It's wonderful to have 3 leaders from around the world in this arena, all here together talking and swapping notes. I thank you all both for doing that, for all your work, the work we do together. We're all in the same fight. It's just wonderful, and I think it's a wonderful expression of the global conference, us all here together. And as we said, we had 104, 106 people, different countries register. Total cumulative live stream views is currently sitting at 31,112. It's a wonderful testament to this, and yeah, I look forward to doing it again next year. I've got to say goodbye to you both. Moonlake, thank you. Mel, you're amazing. It's been wonderful, and now the baton's passed over seamlessly, I have to say. Like, it's really very good. But I have to say goodbye, Moonlake. Goodbye, Mel.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye. Bye.
Thank you. Well done.